Hello, my name is Virginia Johnson, currently Artistic Director of Dance Theatre of Harlem, but also a founding member of the company. I'd like to welcome you to Arthur Mitchell's Harlem, a tour of several locations in the Sugar Hill section of Harlem that were a part of Mr. Mitchell's life. This walking tour was filmed pre-pandemic in September 2019 to commemorate the one-year anniversary of Mr. Mitchell's passing. Born and raised in Harlem, Arthur Mitchell sought to transform this community with the creation of Dance Theatre of Harlem. And 53 years later, the institution he founded continues to be a cultural treasure for the community, as well as a beacon for Harlem to the world. The Harlem community shaped Arthur Mitchell. His dedication to it was lifelong. We hope you enjoy this walk through time, a look at Arthur Mitchell's Harlem.
Welcome to Arthur Mitchell's Harlem Walk. As you all know, we're remembering Mr. Mitchell today. It's exactly 1 year since his passing. And Anna, our executive director, had asked, what did we want to do? And I thought we'd do something outside of the building. There are a lot of new people at Dance Theatre in terms of staff as well as artists. And I said, they hear stories about Mr. Mitchell. But I said, how about if we show staff as well as alumni Mr. Mitchell's life in Harlem. So much of his life evolved right in this area. So we're going to do about a 7-block walk and point out some of the places that were a part of his life as well. Any memory or anything you want to share, you can. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. We're going to start down Convent Avenue. One thing I'm going to point out this studio on the corner, DTH's new studio, because we won't pass it again. So I'll talk about that first as we head down Convent Avenue, okay? All right, let's go. Reverend Scott, how are you?
What's the occasion?
We're commemorating Arthur Mitchell today. It's 1 year since his passing.
Oh,
so we're doing a
was
tour
a great
of
man,
Harlem.
pioneer, trailblazer. Trailblazer.
That is Reverend Scott, everyone. So many of you may remember this property. For the longest, it sat vacant. It was owned by us. Interestingly enough, this property was purchased with the help of Alva Gimbel, the same woman who helped purchase the property that we're in at 466. I didn't realize that, and this is the perfect time to tell you this story. Reverend Scott was also bidding on that property at the same time. He told us this story right after Mr. Mitchell died last year, and it was in speaking with him that we knew that Alva Gimbel was instrumental in helping DTH get this property as well. We didn't know that before. So this building will officially open, I think it's affordable housing. It's going to open, I think, next month. And as I was explaining earlier, the developer saved some space in it for Dance Theatre. They knew we had the property. And so it's a small studio. I was saying we can probably do anything on the floor. Probably Pilates, dance classes with small children, but it's just great to have another space. Sort of some master class if you're doing movement stuff, so because it's not big. But it's an extension, so we're happy. I do want to point out one other thing about this whole area up here where Dance Theatre is. It was known as the Carmensville area. If you know the park that's right on the corner next to us is Carmensville Park. That's why. This was Carmensville area. Folks also know it as Sugar Hill. It was that. And we learned that it got its name because it was the sweet place to be versus the valley. Also up here in this area, a lot of famous artists that lived up here. I believe Duke Ellington was up here. Isadora Duncan lived up here. Thurgood Marshall as well, and others that I just can't think of. There are two very famous apartment buildings up this way too, 409 and 555 Edgecombe. And in fact, there's a movie that's going to be showing at the Gatehouse shortly. I believe the tenants in that building put together a movie about this whole area as well. So we're excited to see that too. So I just want to share that. So I stopped at Convent Avenue Baptist Church because this was Mr. Mitchell's mother's family's first church. And it's here where Arthur Mitchell sang in the choir. A lot of people didn't know that. Miss Mitchell, better known as Mother Mitchell, had plans for Mr. Mitchell to be a preacher. So I think in some respects it played out, not necessarily in the pulpit, but this was his first church home. Mr. Mitchell was one of 6 children. I don't know if everybody knows that. He had an older sister who passed away. I cannot remember her name, but it put him at the helm. There were 3 boys and 2 girls, and they're all gone now. Everybody's gone. Mr. Mitchell was the last, was the oldest and the last to pass away. So this was his first church home. Mother Mitchell was a very religious woman, stern but loving, adored by her family, and stayed on Mr. Mitchell about his faith and about his singing. And I guess eventually he just said, no, I'm not singing, I have other plans. But always entertaining, and I'll tell you more about that when we get to the next stop, which will be where he grew up, the building that he grew up in. All right, so we'll go. Okay. 9 days before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was at this church, he visited this church. So it makes you wonder sort of where New York was. He had just been here, he had been speaking, and a lot of political leaders and other famous people would come to Convent Avenue Baptist Church, much like Abyssinian. They were very popular where people would come, but I thought it was very interesting that just 9 days before he was assassinated, he was at Convent Avenue Baptist Church. So when Mr. Mitchell lived in Harlem as a young boy, he was in a gang. And the gang was called the Hilltop Lovers, which is funny to me. I just don't imagine them being vicious in any way, particularly when his nickname was Artie Baby.
You see, when you're in a gang and you had your debs, they had to tip. I mean, it's a kind of walk. See, the only place you're going to see it is at Dance Theatre of Harlem. That's why my girls, they know how to tip.
Mr. Mitchell grew up in this building right here. He grew up in 536 West 143rd Street on the 2nd floor. That was Mother Mitchell's apartment right there. I'm not sure if that's the apartment they lived in the whole time that he was growing up, or maybe they lived in a larger apartment upstairs, but that was Mother Mitchell's apartment right there. And as I said before, his father was the superintendent for both of these buildings. This is where Mr. Mitchell sort of had his first job, really, pulling the garbage, helping his father. I lived in this building, so I could usually say hi to Mother Mitchell. I lived in 4B, right there, first 17 years of my life. And that's sort of how I came to know the family. You know, I always say, I don't know this for sure, but in my mind, I always believe that Mr. Mitchell was suited for ballet. It was who he was. I think he liked the aristocracy of it, you know, the nobleness of it, and carrying himself that way. And his brothers and sisters would tease him. They used to tell him that he was adopted because he was so different from his other brothers and sisters. But of course they respected him and they would just play with him. But he had a command over his friends, and it's just amazing. Many of them were still with him as he started to come up and started to have his career. So, all right, we'll keep walking. We're going to see where he went to elementary school. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what used to be PS 186. I went to kindergarten and pre-kindergarten here. It's the neighborhood school, so it's where everybody went. So Arthur Mitchell and his siblings went here as well from pre-K to 5th grade. And then Mr. Mitchell went to junior high school 143, which is in Washington Heights. And everybody knows the rest of that story. He did high school at LaGuardia. Was then accepted to Bennington College and decided to forego that to have the opportunity to dance with Mr. Balanchine with New York City Ballet. It's so exciting to see this building this way. It sat vacant for 30 years. And it's only like 2 or 3 years ago, the Boys and Girls Club of Harlem purchased it. So they have the ground floor in here, and the rest again is affordable housing. So if you live in here, you enter on 146th Street, and it's the residence at 186th Street. The other building that's like this is Jacques D'Amboise building. Jacques is in Harlem as well, in a school just like this. And one side is residential housing, and then NDI is on the other side. So it's really great. It's a beautiful space inside as well. So there's a part of Mr. Mitchell's life that people don't know. You know, Mr. Mitchell's father had gone to prison. I don't know for what, but we were only highlighting this because this is the former 30th precinct. And this is where he was brought that day. So again, it's just so interesting. Everything in Mr. Mitchell's life was right here in this neighborhood. It was also at that time when he really became the head of his family. and took that responsibility seriously in terms of being able to provide for his family, looking after his sisters. Those of you who know Shirley Mills, his youngest sister, who was also the school administrator at one time, had the largest family. Shirley had 6 children. And it was just his nature to take care of everybody, but he was really sort of put in charge of that. Why trying to do his own thing and have his own career as well? But he did it. He driving force, you know he is. So, but we were just pointing that out. We're going to go around the corner to the house that he purchased for Mother Mitchell in 1977. So this is 517. Mr. Mitchell purchased this home for his mother in 1977. I like to say at this point, I guess he was doing well, right? Dance Theatre had been up and running since 1969. What's so wonderful about this house is some of Mr. Mitchell's nieces lived here with Mother Mitchell, but so did a number of students, particularly international students, and a lot of students from other cities lived here. A lot of students came so young. Some started so young in the company. And Mr. Mitchell would do whatever was needed, and his family fell in line. I was telling Thera, we had a program through the Department of Cultural Affairs. His brother Charles was an engineer by profession, but also a chef. And while we had that program, these students would come to Dance Theatre one day a week. Charles prepared all of the food for those students, and we had that program here in this house. So it was just beautiful how much his family was behind him and what it was that he was doing. But this was sort of safe haven for a number of out-of-town students in the beginning. And sadly, we lost this house too. Mr. Mitchell bought up a lot of property. I guess you guys realize that now. He had his mother's house here. We had the 2 buildings, and I'll talk about that again, 469 and 479, right outside Dance Theatre, and then the property on St. Nicholas. So he had a vision, and he bought it up at the right time. The issue was having the money to be able to do the things that he wanted to do. 479 was to be a dormitory for international students. And it sat vacant for a long time. And then 2004, we had our financial crisis. This was after our inaugural appearance at Lincoln Center Festival. And we were amazing there. We did St. Louis Woman. We were gorgeous there, but it killed us. And resulted in time in having to sell some of the properties. Vera also asked me recently about Mr. Mitchell's vision, and some of you know it. Long term, Mr. Mitchell wanted an Olympic Village. And he really wanted it between Amsterdam right down to Convent Avenue on 152nd Street, where he would have had the dorms, that space that we looked at first that has housing, would have been housing for many of you. He wanted a black box theater at the bottom, but it all didn't pan out that way. But I just was always amazed by his vision. He was always forward thinking, really never just having enough money. Too often saying, I'll put my own behind it, which really wasn't the thing to do, and he did that a lot, bless him. But it's something that he believed in so strongly, and I think we're just so fortunate to have experienced him and this organization for what he created is really amazing. The other thing I wanted to say about this neighborhood, everything in their lives happened in this neighborhood. The Mitchell Mills family. Vernon, Shirley's funeral, Mr. Mitchell's sister, that was at Church of the Intercession on 155th. So it's amazing how much of the area between 143rd and 152nd, and we can throw in 155th, was a part of his life. Of course, Dance Theatre would be right here, right? And the story with that building is, again, Alva Gimbel saw a performance of Dance Theatre, or she came to a rehearsal, and she asked if he had a home, and she said, find one. And Mr. Mitchell in a taxi, talking to everybody as he would, the taxi driver said, I have a place to show you. And brought him up to what we now know as home. It was a garage at the time. And it's also Alva Gimbel, I just want to say this, who was instrumental in DTH being at the Guggenheim for its inaugural performance in New York City. And as many of you know, we're going back there. The Guggenheim has invited us back. We'll be there September 30th. So it's really special. So this is St. Luke's AME Church. This was Mr. Mitchell's mother's church later in life. She belonged to every group that was in this church. Her funeral was here. I think all of Mr. Mitchell's nieces may have been married here, and I think he gave all of them away, actually. And his service was not here, though. Mr. Mitchell's service was at Abyssinian. And that's all I really want to say about this church. St. Luke's and St. John, when we first met Reverend Scott, were wonderful to us. When Dance Theatre's crisis hit in 2004, the pastors of both churches came over to ask what could they do and made a donation. So again, it speaks to Mr. Mitchell and how DTH was viewed in the community and still is for the most part. And so it's about us just continuing that legacy however we can. Having some of this information that I've shared with you, sharing it with others, and just continuing that story about Arthur Mitchell and Dance Theatre of Harlem.
I was 36 years old, and I said, Mr. Balanchine, I'm going to start this school of ballet in Harlem. He said, what? I'm going to start a school in Harlem for the kids here, and it should be classical ballet. The rumors that went around, he's crazy, insane, nuts, black kids could not relate. It's just, you know. And I took $25,000, which was all the money I had, and I put in a dance floor and a bar. We had no mirrors. In 2 months, I had 400 kids in the school. In 4 months, I had 800 kids in the school, boys and girls. And they wanted this structure and discipline in their lives so badly. And I felt, hey, I'm the one that's going to give it to them.
Residents of 60 Riverside Drive, members of Dance Theatre of Harlem, friends and family members of Arthur Mitchell, thank you all for attending today's very special event to honor Arthur Mitchell. Tomorrow marks 3 years since our neighbor of 36 years, Arthur Mitchell, left us. He left behind a legacy that will resonate throughout New York City and the dance world for a long time. So we stand here today to honor that legacy and perhaps even brag a bit that our building is where his creative genius may have at times worked its magic.
Harlem is a dynamic community and one that continues to evolve. Arthur Mitchell's spirit is very much alive here on Dance Theatre of Harlem Way. I hope you enjoyed the walk through Arthur Mitchell's Harlem, and I hope you will come to visit us. Mr. Mitchell's vision is alive and well up here on Sugar Hill. We are grateful for the support from so many of our fans from across the globe. If you are inclined, please click on the donate button to make a contribution today. Thank you for joining us for this presentation, and thank you for your support of Dance Theatre of Harlem. We hope to see you soon.